Wanted to start off by just talking about the big picture here. Why are we all here? Why are we here thinking about consumer protection, financial inclusion for the poor? And the reality is, being poor brings on many issues that are unique to in developing countries, unique to the financial needs. For instance, there's very irregular income. Whereas in a lot of the world, income is a regular thing that happens with a paycheck, but in developing country context, for a lot of poor households, it's either seasonal because of farming or just highly uncertain. And that brings about different financial needs when it comes to financial inclusion, what a product should look like for a household. It also means that consumption can be highly variable. Big shocks can happen that they don't have insurance for. Health, for instance, health calamities can rise up, and then that means there's a need for money that they may not have been able to save for, and they don't have an insurance, a health insurance that allows them to cover that. One thing that's real about all these issues is that when you have these issues arise, because individuals are poor and are tight for funds, when these things arise, they don't always have the luxury of doing thorough research to find out about all the products available to them and figuring out what exactly the best product is. And this is where consumer protection becomes really important, when you intersect that reality of the decision-making moment when there's a crisis going on with the products that are being offered. And that's where it becomes very important for us to think hard about how to make sure that the products that are available and the information that people have available is well suited to making good decisions. Now, when we look at the history here, one of the things that's striking is that previously a lot of the focus on consumer protection was on concepts of accountability and responsibility. And basically this was when you look at what this meant practically, it was a lot of financial education kind of programs. We still see a lot of this today. Unfortunately, we don't see much in the way of large-scale programs that have strong positive effects, helping guide people to better financial decisions. And there isn't really very strong evidence. There are some pockets, and there are a few studies here and there that have shown positive results, but a lot more have shown nothing. And so we need to really think a bit harder about financial education before we put that as our main foot forward in how we're dealing with consumer protection. So the second theme that we've seen historically is loading things up on products and saying, well, no, let's just offer better products. What do we do to get price down? What do we do to get fees down? And while that's noble, it's certainly better for the consumers to have lower fees than higher fees. One thing that's clear is a focus strictly on products is not enough. That we need to think a little bit more expansively about the intersection between information and products. Now, one of the things that brings us to is a shift towards behavioral economics as a tool for learning more about what's working and what is the right design of both a product and a policy, regulatory policy, to help consumers get the products that they need. So what is behavioral economics doing? Behavioral economics can be thought of as the intersection of psychology and economics. It's using tools from psychology that tell us a lot about how people make decisions, things about how attention is really important and how it's limited. We can only pay attention to so many things at once. So when something is not on the top of mind, what's going to happen? Psychology also tells us a lot about how people make trade-offs between now and the future, how maybe sometimes we all succumb to temptations and are impetuous about things that we want right now at the expense of forgetting about things that we need to do in the future. So the psychology brings to bear a lot of ideas of that nature. What economics brings to the table is a rigorous analytical approach for thinking through, well, what is actually working? How do we set up tests to figure out, is A better than B in achieving the goals that we have as a firm or as a policymaker? And it's helpful for also thinking about how firms are going to interact with each other. If one firm offers one thing, what's going to happen to another firm? If we set a certain regulatory policy, how might firms respond? So behavioral economics basically brings both of these toolkits together to help us think harder about both regulatory policy and product design if we're a financial institution. So let me give you some concrete examples. For instance, how are people going to perceive information? It's not as simple as just giving people an interest rate. The way that information is presented is going to matter a lot to how they use that information. I'll give you an extreme example. Suppose that we wanted to run a weight loss program and we gave people information about how much they weigh. If we did that in kilograms or pounds in America, that might work well. If we gave people information about how many stones they weigh, that probably wouldn't work so well. People don't know what stones are, certainly not in America. So the way information is presented is important. Thinking about that for interest rates is no different. Suppose you presented interest rates as a annualized compounded interest rate, but yet that's not how people think about it. They want to think about it in Kenya shillings or dollars or whatever the currency is, or they want to think about it as a monthly rate. And if that's how they think about interest rates, presenting them interest rates in a different unit can actually lead to ignoring that information. And this is what behavioral economics brings to bear, is to think about not just is the information provided, but how is it provided, and how it is provided will make a big difference on whether it's actually used. So a lot of also behavioral economics is thinking about nudges. Nudges are basically ways of presenting information to help guide people to a decision that they themselves would say they want in a moment of deep reflection and full information. It's about giving tools for decision making so that they can take action easily based on information provided. It might be tools, for instance, for how to reduce debt or over-indebtedness. It might be about making them aware of how much debt they have. It might be about setting up a plan for making future payments. It might be about saying, please give me reminders at certain points of time in order to engage in the types of financial transactions like paying off debt that I want to. So a lot of behavioral economics sometimes is taking a basic product that's out there and just figuring out how to tweak it to make it more effective. So one question that often comes up is, a very pragmatic one. Okay, so these are some big picture ideas, but how do researchers actually partner with policymakers? And there's a few different ways. So first of all, with regulators, I think one big issue is working with behavioral economists to how to present product information better. And this can be done both through collaboration with a financial institution as well as with a regulator. There can be tools for consumers, for instance, apps, perhaps on a cell phone, that allows someone to do comparison across products. A regulator could come in and require that products are posted to a common board, that this information is fed into an app, and then if a consumer wants to know what are the interest rates on loans with the following terms, they can find out. Or what are the fees on different bank accounts? And if there's one app that allows them to get that information, they can then make a more informed decision. But that's easy to say in theory. In practice, though, that could be done really well, or it could also be done really badly. And you need to set up tests to figure out, are people using this information or not? There is evidence from projects that shows that people often don't have this information. We did a test, for instance, in Turkey with a very large bank throughout all of Turkey, in which we gave people half off, not we, but the bank discounted their interest rates by half for using overdraft protection on their current account, their checking account. And normally we would think if you lower someone's price that they might use it more. Instead, we found the opposite. We found that when we lowered the price, they used it even less. Now that's a bit strange, right? If you go into a store and we see a product on sale, we tend to think people will buy more of it, not less of it. So what happened here? Well, we think what happened is people didn't know the interest rate. And so when we gave them half off the interest rate, their thought was, wow, what was the interest rate? Must have been pretty high. And they learned what the rate was, and then they used less of the loan. And that's a striking result showing how little information is really out there. And that's an important role a regulator can play, is just helping consumers know and get easy access to what interest rates are. A similar study was done in Mexico by IPA researchers from the World Bank that also showed how little information banks had even about some of their competitors and consumers had about what the product offerings were in their space. So another area of potential work is what to do about complaint mechanisms. One of the common issues is that you have financial institutions that are well-meaning at the management level, perhaps, but put incentives in place for employees to generate repayment, for instance, on loans, and that when it trickles down, could actually lead to some unintended actions by people on the ground. And so one important thing there is to test out different ways of providing vehicles for consumers to complain about financial institutions and make it clear that they have recourse, they have some place to turn to. That could increase trust, increase comfort with using financial institutions, and end up being profitable for the banks, while at the same time being a good watchdog process. Some of these ideas are ripe for just testing in the field and seeing how they influence actual decisions. Another way of testing some of these as a preliminary method, I wouldn't use this and immediately move to large-scale policy, but is to run lab experiments, bringing people into an office environment and asking them to look at apps and getting feedback on this type of information to see, just from that, how can you whittle down the potential ways of releasing information to a few rather than testing out many at once. And so a lab and field combination is actually, I think, a very good approach for dealing with some of these consumer protection issues. Lastly, I'm going to leave you with some bigger thoughts on how to move forward. I know there's a lot of people there. The IPA team is quite keen to help do two things in this space as a byproduct of this meeting, which I wish I could be at. One is to help match up partners with regulator or financial institution with researchers. There's a lot of eager parties on both sides, and we want to help make that match happen. And that's part of the purpose of this whole event. And it's part of frankly, it's one of the roles of IPA around the world, is in bridging the gap that sometimes happens between researchers and people doing things, so that everybody can learn how best to do whatever the task is at hand, in this case, consumer protection. And lastly, we actually do have a grant that does allow us to some funding to do this work, and certainly some relationships that we're happy to try to push on and raise further funds. So if there's good partnerships in hand, we're very keen to go out collaboratively and try to make this research happen, so that the world can learn how best we can go about protecting consumers and expanding access to financial services. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope to see you on some other trip.